The rain fell softly on the day Amaka buried her husband, Chinedu. It was a modest funeral, filled with whispered condolences and the scent of wet flowers. Chinedu had been a banker, a man whose charm could light up a room and whose discipline kept their home steady. They had no children, but their marriage was a tapestry of shared dreams, quiet evenings, and promises whispered under starlit skies, or so Amaka thought. As she stood by his grave, her heart heavy with grief, she believed she was closing a chapter of love. But in the shadows of their home, a secret waited. A locked drawer. A journal. A truth that would unravel everything she thought she knew about the man she loved. The air felt heavier now, as if the world itself knew something she didn't. What was Chinedu hiding? And why did it feel like the man she buried was a stranger? A week after the funeral, the house was a museum of memories. Every corner held echoes of Chinedu, his favorite armchair, the coffee mug he always used, the study where he spent late nights poring over work. Amaka wandered through the rooms, packing his belongings into boxes, each item a stab of grief. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the distant hum of a neighbor's radio. In his study, she found it. Tucked beneath a pile of old bank statements in his mahogany desk was a drawer she'd never noticed before. It was sealed with a rusted padlock, the kind that looked out of place in a home where secrets were never kept, or so she believed. Chinedu had never locked anything. Not his phone, not his car, not even the safe where they kept their savings. Why this? Curiosity burned through her sorrow. She rummaged through the house for a hammer, her hands trembling as she struck the padlock until it gave way with a metallic snap. Inside the drawer lay a single item, a brown leather journal, its edges worn, its weight heavy with untold stories. Amaka's fingers hesitated before touching it, as if it might bite. She opened the cover. The first page stole her breath. To my true family. I wish I had the courage to make things right. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Chinedu's. Amaka sat on the floor of the study, the journal open in her lap, its pages a map to a world she didn't know existed. The early entries were mundane, notes about business trips, meetings, the price of fuel. But as she turned the pages, the words grew heavier, more intimate. Names appeared, unfamiliar yet written with a tenderness that made her stomach churn. Ngozi. Chika. A woman. A boy. October 12th. Watched Chika's school recital today. He was nervous, but his smile lit up the stage. Proud of my boy. November 3rd. Ngozi made egusi stew tonight. We laughed until the neighbors knocked. I don't deserve this happiness. Amaka's hands shook as she read. Chinedu had never mentioned a recital, a boy, or anyone named Ngozi. The entries painted a life she wasn't part of, a life filled with birthdays, bedtime stories, and love that didn't include her. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments. Was Ngozi a sister? A cousin? But the affection in his words felt too deep, too personal. Then she found it, scrawled in the margin of a page, an address. A small town, just 30 minutes from their home in Lagos. Her heart pounded, a cocktail of fear, anger, and curiosity. She didn't sleep that night. By morning, she was in her car, the journal on the passenger seat, driving toward answers she wasn't sure she wanted. The town was quiet, with dusty roads and houses that leaned into each other like old friends. She found the address easily, a modest yellow house with a mango tree in the yard. Plastic chairs were stacked outside, and a tricycle toy lay abandoned near the gate. Amaka's hands gripped the steering wheel, her breath shallow. What was she about to walk into? Amaka knocked on the door, her heart thudding so loudly she thought it might drown out the sound. The door opened, and a woman stood there, graceful, with warm brown eyes and a cautious smile. She was younger than Amaka, but there was a quiet strength in her posture. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her voice soft but guarded. Amaka's throat tightened. I knew Chinedu. Your husband." The woman's smile vanished. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the air between them crackled with unspoken questions. "You mean my husband?" she said, her voice steady but sharp. Amaka's world tilted. She forced herself to speak. "Chinedu. He was my husband too." The woman, Ngozi, as Amaka soon learned, stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. The living room was small but warm, with a worn sofa and framed photos on the walls. Amaka's eyes locked onto one immediately, a wedding photo. Chinedu, smiling broadly, his arm around Ngozi. The date on the frame was 2 years before Amaka's own wedding. Before she could process it, a boy appeared from a hallway. He was about 10, with Chinedu's nose, his eyes, his quiet confidence. "Mama, who's this?" he asked, his voice curious but unafraid. Ngozi's gaze softened. "Chika, go play outside for a bit." Chika. The boy from the journal. Amaka's legs felt weak. She wasn't the wife. She was the other woman. That night, Amaka sat in her darkened living room, the journal a heavy weight in her hands. She traced the lines of Chinedu's handwriting, her mind replaying their life together like a film with missing scenes. The business trips to the east that lasted days longer than necessary. The silences that she'd chalked up to stress. The toy airplane he'd brought home one evening, claiming it was a gift from a client's child. Now she knew it was for Chika. She remembered the way Chinedu would hum softly while cooking, the way he'd hold her hand during long drives, the way he'd promised her forever. How could that man, the man she loved, have built an entire world without her? A world with another wife, another home, a son? The journal became her obsession. She read it cover to cover, searching for clues, for a reason. The entries revealed a man torn between two lives, too weak to choose, too selfish to let either go. He wrote of loving Ngozi's laughter, of Chika's first steps, of Amaka's strength. He wrote of guilt that gnawed at him, of sleepless nights spent wrestling with his lies. But he never chose. He never told the truth. And now he was gone, leaving Amaka and Ngozi to pick up the pieces of his betrayal. Amaka returned to the journal one last time, desperate for closure. The final entries were different, darker, heavier. Chinedu's words dripped with regret. January 15th. I see Amaka's trust in me, and it breaks my heart. She deserves better. Ngozi deserves better. Chika deserves a father who isn't a coward. February 3rd. I've tried to fix this, but I don't know how. If I tell the truth, I lose them all. If I stay silent, I lose myself. The final entry was dated the day before his accident. If you're reading this, I've failed you all. I'm sorry. I loved you both, but love wasn't enough. Amaka closed the journal, tears burning her eyes. He hadn't just lied, he'd built a house of cards, and his death had sent it crashing down. She wanted to scream, to demand answers from a man who could no longer give them. But the journal was all she had, a confession written in ink, sealed by silence. Grief turned to fury. Amaka smashed the frame that held their wedding photo, the glass shattering across the floor like her trust. She screamed until her throat was raw, until the silence of the house swallowed her pain. But in the wreckage of her anger, something else emerged, strength. She drove back to the yellow house. Not to confront Ngozi, but to talk. Ngozi welcomed her in, her own eyes red from crying. They sat across from each other, two women bound by the same betrayal. Ngozi spoke first, her voice steady but soft. "I didn't know about you," she said. "He told me his trips were for work. I believed him." Amaka nodded, her own story spilling out. They talked for hours, piecing together Chinedu's double life. The trips that overlapped, the excuses that mirrored each other, the love he'd split between them like a rationed resource. They cried, not for him, but for themselves, for the years they'd lost, the trust they'd given to a man who didn't deserve it. In the end, they made a choice. They wouldn't let his lies define them. They split his assets, bank accounts, properties, investments, ensuring Chika's future was secure. They didn't hate each other. They refused to let Chinedu's cowardice turn them into enemies. Days later, Amaka stood by a quiet lake, the journal in her hands. The sun was setting, painting the water gold. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. She opened the journal to the last page and tore it out, letting the wind carry it to the water. Page after page, she let go of the secrets, the lies, the weight of a life that wasn't hers to carry. As the final page sank beneath the surface, Amaka felt lighter. She had loved Chinedu with everything she had. But now, standing by the lake, she realized something more important. She loved herself more. And somewhere, in a yellow house 30 minutes away, Ngozi was teaching Chika how to fly a toy airplane. They were moving forward too. The journal was gone. The truth was free. And so was Amaka. The deepest wounds aren't always from strangers, they're from those who promised to protect our hearts. But healing begins the moment you stop asking why, and start choosing what next. Amaka didn't get closure from the man who betrayed her. She gave it to herself. By walking away. By letting go. If you've ever been lied to, left behind, or led in circles by someone you trusted, this story is for you. Don't suffer in silence. Don't stay broken for someone who never asked for forgiveness. Share this with someone who needs strength today. And like, subscribe and comment for more interesting stories. The truth may hurt, but it never traps you.